She faked amnesia to escape. The billionaire CEO, but he found her with their baby. I'm sorry. Do I know you? 5 words. That's all it took to destroy Damian Cross. Natalia Reyes watched them land like bullets, watched his face drain of color as he gripped the hospital room doorframe hard enough to make his knuckles white. His tie hung loose, stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, those green eyes that used to look through her during dinner conversations about quarterly earnings, now held something she'd never seen before. Pure, raw desperation. The hospital bracelet on her wrist read Jane Doe, but Natalia knew exactly who she was. She knew exactly who the man standing 5 feet away was. The CEO of Cross Atlantic Industries, the father of the 9-month-old baby sleeping against her chest, and the reason she'd spent the last 6 months running. She just had to convince him she'd forgotten all of it. Have you ever had to become someone else to survive someone you loved? Baby Elena stirred in her arms, tiny fingers grasping the thin hospital gown. The infant made a small sound, and Natalia watched Damian's entire body react a flinch of longing so powerful it was almost violent. His hands trembled at his sides. This wasn't the composed billionaire who'd once told her he couldn't miss a board meeting for her ultrasound. This was someone broken. Don't. His voice cracked on the single word. Please, don't do this. A nurse bustled through the doorway, oblivious to the tension thick enough to choke on. Mr. Cross, thank goodness you're here. We've been trying to reach you for days. She adjusted her clipboard, all professional efficiency. Your wife was found unconscious in a convenience store parking lot in Portland. She's not my wife. Damian's interruption was quiet but absolute. He never took his eyes off Natalia. Not anymore. The nurse's professional smile faltered, her gaze darting between them. Oh, I apologize. The emergency contact information in the baby's diaper bag listed you as. She caught the warning look in Damian's eyes and cleared her throat. I'll give you some privacy. The neurologist will be by shortly to discuss her condition. When the door clicked shut, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. Natalia could feel Damian studying her face, searching for cracks in her performance. She'd practiced this. Since waking in this hospital bed with doctors murmuring about head trauma and memory loss, she'd rehearsed the blank stare, the polite confusion, the absent expression of someone whose memories had been wiped clean. She hadn't practiced for how it would feel to see him again. The doctor said, "You have retrograde amnesia." Damian moved closer to the bed, each step measured, as if approaching something fragile that might shatter. You don't remember the accident. You don't remember the past 6 months. His eyes dropped to Elena, and his expression did something Natalia had never seen it shattered completely. Or anything before that? They said my memories might come back. Natalia kept her voice steady, clinical, the tone of someone reciting medical information. Or they might not. Right now, everything's just blank. It wasn't entirely a lie. The convenience store incident hadn't been planned. She'd actually fainted months of exhaustion and malnutrition, and living on the edge of discovery finally catching up with her body. One moment she'd been buying formula with the last of her cash, and the next she was waking in a hospital bed with doctors talking about contusions and memory loss and finding the father. When she'd realized what they thought that she genuinely couldn't remember, she'd seen her way out. If Damian believed she had amnesia, he couldn't hurt her. He couldn't use her past against her. He couldn't take Elena. The deception had crystallized in that moment with the clarity of survival instinct. Damian pulled the visitor's chair to her bedside and sank into it. Up close, Natalia could see the toll 6 months had taken on him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His expensive suit hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he'd forgotten to eat. His hands, those hands that used to fly across keyboards and sign contracts worth millions, were shaking as he looked at the baby. Her name is Elena, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone memorizing something precious they might lose again. Elena Sophia, she's 9 months old. She has your eyes and your laugh. His voice broke, and I've been searching for both of you for half a year. This was the danger zone. Natalia had known she couldn't run forever, not with a baby. She'd been so careful paying cash for everything, avoiding cameras, changing locations every few weeks, using fake names. But babies needed doctors, vaccines, checkups. She'd taken Elena to a free clinic for a fever, and somehow, despite all her precautions, Damien's relentless investigators had triangulated her location. The machinery of wealth had found her. It always did. "Why were you looking for us?" she asked, playing her role. Damien's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, anger, regret, all tangled together. "Because 6 months ago you disappeared with my daughter without a word. I came home from a business trip to Tokyo, and you were gone." His hands clenched. "Your phone disconnected. Your bank accounts emptied. The engagement ring I gave you was on the kitchen counter. It was like you'd vanished into thin air." "If Elena is your daughter," Natalia said carefully, forcing confusion into her tone, "why would I run?" The question hung heavy between them. Natalia watched Damien wrestle with it. Watched him arrive at the same place he must have arrived at 1,000 times over the past 6 months. "Because I gave you reasons to," he finally admitted, and the honesty in his voice nearly undid her careful composure. "Because I was so focused on building my empire that I didn't see what it was costing. Because you begged me to slow down, to be present, to choose you and Elena over the next merger, the next acquisition, the next $1 billion. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands, and I didn't listen until it was too late." Despite herself, despite the act, Natalia felt her heart constrict. This was the Damien she'd fallen in love with 5 years ago, vulnerable, honest, stripped of his corporate armor. The version of him that emerged so rarely she'd started to believe he'd disappeared completely, consumed by the machine of success he'd built. That Damien had proposed to her on a rainy Tuesday, not with a diamond, but with a promise scrawled on a coffee shop napkin. "I choose you, every day, forever." But promises written on napkins were easy. Keeping them when billion-dollar deals beckoned, that was the part he'd failed. Sometimes the hardest stories to hear are the ones that reflect our own choices back at us. If this is stirring something in you, if you've ever loved someone who couldn't see you while standing right in front of you, you understand why the words, "I'm sorry," stop meaning anything when they're repeated enough times. "The neurologist says I need familiar surroundings to help trigger memories," Natalia said, shifting Elena in her arms. "The baby was making small movements, about to wake. Where was I living before?" "With me," Damien said immediately, hope blazing across his face like sunrise. "In our penthouse. We were." He stopped, recalibrating. "You lived with me for 4 years. We were engaged for 2 of them. You were 7 months pregnant when you finally set a wedding date. And then," his expression clouded, "I missed the wedding planning meeting because of a board crisis. Then I missed the venue viewing. Then the cake tasting." Natalia could fill in the rest. She'd lived it. The endless string of broken promises. The late-night phone calls that interrupted the few dinners he made it home for. The vacations canceled for emergency meetings. The way Damien's eyes would glaze over during conversations, his mind already 3 steps ahead to the next problem to solve, the next fire to put out, the next competitor to crush. The final straw had been Elena's first laugh. Natalia had called Damien at the office, breathless with joy, begging him to come home early. She laughed, Damien. A real laugh. "You have to hear it." He'd promised he'd be there in an hour. She'd kept Elena awake, making silly faces, trying to coax another laugh for Daddy. He'd arrived 4 hours later, carrying takeout and apologies. Elena was already asleep. "I'm sorry," he'd said. The same words he always said. "This deal is crucial. I'll make it up to you." But there was no making up for first moments. They only happened once. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, she'd started packing, not frantically, methodically. She'd withdrawn the money from her personal account, the account she'd maintained from her art gallery job before Damien, before the penthouse, before becoming an appendage to someone else's ambitions. She'd sold her jewelry, not the engagement ring. She'd left that as a statement and disappeared into the anonymous sprawl of America. For 6 months, she'd been free. Free from the gilded cage of Damien's wealth. Free from the loneliness of loving someone who was never present. Free to be a mother, without competing with quarterly earnings reports for attention. But freedom came with a price. Exhaustion, poverty, isolation. The constant fear that one day Damien would find them. And now he had. "Take us home," Natalia heard herself say. The words tasted like surrender, but what choice did she have? If she refused, he'd fight for custody. His lawyers would bury her. His money would win. She'd seen him dismantle competitors. She knew how relentless he could be when he wanted something. At least this way, she could stay with Elena. And if Damien believed she had amnesia, maybe she could maintain enough emotional distance to protect her heart. Damien's head snapped up, disbelief and hope warring across his features. You'll come home? The doctor said familiar environments help, Natalia repeated flatly, and Elena needs stability. I've converted the West Wing into a nursery, Damien said, words tumbling out in a rush. I had pediatric specialists consult on everything, the crib, the lighting, the air filtration system, and I hired a night nurse, a day nanny, a chef who specializes in infant nutrition. No, Natalia's voice cut through his planning like a blade. No staff. If I'm doing this, I take care of Elena myself. Damien looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Okay, he said quietly. Whatever you need. What she needed was to wake up from this nightmare. But Elena was stirring, making the small mewling sounds that meant she was hungry, and Natalia's body responded with the practical demands of motherhood that transcended everything else. I need to feed her, she said. Damien stood immediately. I'll get the nurse. I can manage. Natalia's tone was sharper than intended. She softened it with effort. I remember how to do this, even if I don't remember other things. The lie was getting easier. Or maybe it was getting harder. She couldn't tell anymore. Over the next few days in the hospital, Damien barely left. He slept in the visitor's chair beside her bed, his expensive suit wrinkling, his usually immaculate appearance dissolving into something more human. He fetched anything she needed, brought meals from the cafeteria, and watched Elena with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Natalia caught him sometimes, in the early morning hours when he thought she was asleep, standing over the hospital bassinet, with tears streaming silently down his face. I miss so much, he whispered one night, his voice breaking in the darkness. 9 months of your life, little one. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Natalia kept her eyes closed, pretending sleep, but something cracked in her chest at the raw pain in his voice. This wasn't the distracted CEO who'd missed doctor appointments. This was someone genuinely destroyed by what he'd lost. But was it real? Or was it just another temporary emotion that would fade when the next big deal called? The doctors cleared Natalia for discharge on the 3rd day. A neurologist with kind eyes and graying hair explained the unpredictability of memory recovery. Some patients remember everything within days, she said, making notes on her tablet. Others take months. Some never fully recover their past. She looked at Natalia with sympathy. Be patient with yourself. Your brain has experienced trauma. Healing takes time. Natalia nodded, memorizing every detail to maintain consistency. She'd need to reference this conversation later, keep her story straight. The deception required constant vigilance. The drive from Portland to Seattle took 3 hours. Damien had arranged for a car service, not his usual driver, Natalia noted, which meant he was trying to keep this private. The vehicle was equipped with a rear-facing infant car seat, brand new, with the tags still attached. He'd thought of everything. As they merged onto I-5, Natalia stared out the window at the landscape sliding past. She'd made this drive 6 months ago in reverse, fleeing Seattle in a used Honda she'd bought for cash. She'd driven through the night, Elena crying in the back seat, fear and determination warring in her chest. Now, she was returning as a stranger to her own life. The Seattle skyline appeared as afternoon faded into evening, the Space Needle piercing the sky, downtown towers glittering against the darkening clouds. Natalia pretended it was unfamiliar, but she knew every landmark. That was the coffee shop where they'd had their first date, where Damien had talked for 3 hours about his vision for transforming how companies manage data infrastructure. She'd found his passion intoxicating then, not realizing it would eventually consume everything else. That was Pike Place Market, where he'd promised to take her every Saturday morning. They'd gone twice before his Saturdays became indistinguishable from weekdays. That was the park where Damien had sworn he'd cut back on work hours after she'd told him she was pregnant. The promise had lasted 2 weeks before a major investor crisis pulled him back into 80-hour work weeks. That was Swedish Medical Center, where she'd given birth to Elena, alone, because Damien had been in Frankfurt negotiating a merger. He'd made it to the hospital 7 hours after Elena was born, bringing flowers and apologies and a onesie that said, "Daddy's little coder." She'd smiled for the photos his assistant took. Inside, something had broken. There's a reason you're here listening to this instead of scrolling past. You're not alone in needing stories about whether love can survive when one person's dreams devour everything else. Stay with me. The car pulled up to a high-rise in the heart of downtown, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. The doorman recognized Damien immediately, surprise flashing across his face when he saw Natalia and the baby. "Mr. Cross, welcome back. Can I help with?" "We're fine, Marcus. Thank you." Damien's tone was polite but firm, closing down questions. The private elevator required a key card. As they ascended, Natalia watched the numbers climb. 20 floors, 30, 40. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor. Of course it did. The elevator doors opened directly into the residence. Natalia stepped into the space she'd fled 6 months ago, and the familiarity hit her like a physical force. She'd walked these floors, cooked in that kitchen, stared out those floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below while feeling more isolated than she'd ever felt in her life. The penthouse was exactly as she'd left it, sleek, modern, expensive, and utterly impersonal. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and white. Abstract art chosen by a decorator, not because anyone loved it. A space designed to impress, not to live in. Except for the West Wing. "I had some changes made," Damien said, his voice uncertain as he gestured down the hallway. "Would you like to see?" Natalia followed him, Elena drowsy against her shoulder. The West Wing had been a guest suite before, cold, minimalist, rarely used. Damien opened the double doors, and Natalia's breath caught, despite herself. He'd transformed it completely. The cold, lifeless suite was now a wonderland of soft colors and gentle lighting. Pale yellow walls, warm hardwood floors, a rocking chair positioned near the window overlooking the city. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with children's books, board books, picture books, cloth books for teething. A mobile hung above the crib, and Natalia's heart stuttered when she recognized what it was made of. Paper cranes, hundreds of them, in soft pastels, suspended from delicate strings. Cranes were her favorite bird. She'd told Damien that, on their third date, explaining how her grandmother used to fold them from whatever paper she could find, filling Natalia's childhood with the promise of wishes coming true. "How did you?" Natalia caught herself, remembering she wasn't supposed to know any of this. "They're beautiful." "I thought you might like them," Damien said quietly. "I don't know why. I just did." But what stopped Natalia's breath entirely was the wall opposite the crib. It was covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, printed, framed, arranged in a massive collage, and they were all of her. Natalia pregnant, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Natalia asleep on the couch, afternoon light streaming across her face. Natalia in her art studio, paint smeared and glowing. Natalia at a cafe, reading, unaware she was being photographed. Natalia in every unguarded moment, in every slice of ordinary life, captured and preserved. "I had these printed from my phone," Damien said quietly behind her. His voice was rough with emotion. "After you left, I realized I'd taken hundreds of photos of you. I just never." He trailed off. "I never stopped long enough to look at them. I never told you how beautiful you were, how proud I was of you, how much I—" He stopped himself, perhaps remembering she wasn't supposed to know any of this, that to her he was supposed to be a stranger. Natalia stared at the wall, emotion clogging her throat. This wasn't the Damien she'd left. That man had been too preoccupied to notice her, too busy to see her. But the evidence was here, literally hundreds of pieces of evidence, that he had been paying attention. He just hadn't known how to show it. Or maybe he'd been too much of a coward to prioritize it. "Did I love you?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Damien's reflection appeared in the dark window, his expression devastated. "You did," he whispered, "and I loved you. I just loved you badly." He moved closer but didn't touch her. "I took you for granted, assumed you'd always be there, Always be patient while I built my empire. I thought I had time. I thought we could have everything, the company, the success, and you, and our family." His voice cracked. "I was wrong, and by the time I realized it, you were gone." Natalia turned to face him, Elena sleeping against her shoulder, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room. "Why didn't you just let us go? You're a billionaire. You could have any woman." "I don't want any woman," Damien interrupted, intensity blazing in his eyes. "I want you. I want Elena. I want the family I was too blind and stupid to appreciate when I had it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I know I have no right to ask for another chance. I know trust isn't something I can buy or negotiate or acquire through some strategic maneuver. But Natalia, I'm asking anyway. Let me prove I've changed. Let me show you who I can be, who I should have been all along." This was the moment. The pivotal point where everything would shift. Natalia could maintain her charade, use the amnesia as armor, keep him at a distance. It was safer that way. She couldn't be hurt by someone she didn't remember loving. Or she could tell the truth. If you've made it this far, something in this story has grabbed you. That pull you feel? That's because you recognize the impossible position of wanting to believe someone can change while being terrified they'll just break your heart again. Trust that instinct to stay. "I need to put her down," Natalia said instead of answering. "She's asleep." Damien nodded, stepping back to give her space. Natalia moved to the crib, expensive, organic, every safety feature money could buy, and laid Elena down gently. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her small chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. For a moment, Natalia just stood there, one hand on Elena's back, feeling the warm solidity of her daughter. This was what mattered. This was what she'd run to protect. When she turned back, Damien was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. "I had the guest room prepared for you," he said. "It's right next door. But if you'd prefer to stay in here with Elena, I can set up a bed, whatever makes you comfortable." "Next door is fine," Natalia said. She needed space, needed to process everything without his presence filling every corner of every room. That night, lying in the guest room that was bigger than some apartments, Natalia stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd done. The bed was luxurious. The sheets probably cost more than a month's rent in the places she'd been staying. Through the wall, she could hear Elena's soft breathing on the baby monitor. Safe, warm, fed. Everything Natalia had barely been able to provide over the past 6 months. But at what cost? She heard movement in the hallway, footsteps, then silence. Curiosity pulled her from bed. She cracked open her door and peered out. Damien was sitting on the floor outside the nursery door, his back against the wall, his laptop on his knees, but unopened. Just sitting there, keeping watch. Natalia closed her door, silently. Something in her chest twisted painfully. This wasn't the man she'd left. Or maybe it was, buried under layers of ambition and fear, and the armor required to build empires. Maybe she just hadn't known how to find him. Or maybe he hadn't known how to be found. Morning came too early. Elena woke at 6, hungry and vocal about it. Natalia found her way to the nursery, everything still unfamiliar in the early light. Damien was gone from the hallway, but she could hear him in the kitchen. When she carried Elena out after feeding her, she found Damien at the stove, attempting to make breakfast. The kitchen was a disaster. Broken eggs on the counter, something burning in a pan, coffee overflowing from the machine. He looked up when he heard her, panic and determination warring on his face. "I was trying to make pancakes," he admitted. "It's not going well." Despite everything, Natalia felt a laugh bubble up. "I can see that." "I usually order in," Damien said, using a towel to mop up the coffee, "or eat at the office. I don't actually know how to cook much beyond toast." He looked at the smoking pan and grimaced, and apparently not even that reliably. "Move over," Natalia said, surprising herself. She shifted Elena to one hip and took over the stove, turning down the heat, salvaging what she could. "Hand me the eggs that aren't broken." They worked in tandem, not quite together, but not quite separate. Damien following her instructions, both of them hyper-aware of the domestic intimacy of the moment. Elena watched from her bouncy seat, making small cooing sounds. "She likes you," Damien said softly, watching his daughter. "She doesn't usually take to new people." The irony wasn't lost on Natalia. He was a new person to Elena, though he didn't know it. Elena had never met her father. She'd spent her entire 9 months of life with only Natalia, in a series of anonymous apartments and cheap motels, loved but living on the edge of survival. "Tell me about her," Natalia said, playing her role. "What should I know?" Damien's face transformed. Over breakfast, he told her everything he'd learned from studying the single video clip he'd managed to obtain, from interviewing anyone who might have seen them, from 6 months of obsessive investigation. "She does this little nose scrunch when she's hungry," he said, "and she likes when you hum. I don't know what song, but there's a clip of you humming, and she's just mesmerized." His voice carried wonder. "She sleeps with her fist by her face, just like you do. And she has this laugh. I've only heard it once, on a video, but it's—" He trailed off, emotion overwhelming him. Natalia's chest ached. He'd been studying them like a scientist studying something precious and irretrievable, learning his daughter through fragments and shadows. "I want to know her," he said quietly. "Really know her. Not through videos or reports or secondhand information. I want to be there when she learns to walk, when she says her first word, when his voice broke. I've already missed so much." "Then be there," Natalia said before she could stop herself. "Starting now." Something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness, they were far from that. Not trust, that was even further away. But maybe possibility. The smallest crack in the armor around Natalia's heart. They fell into a routine over the following days. Mornings started with Damien's attempts at breakfast gradually improving but still frequently disastrous. Elena's schedule became the framework everything else built around. Damien cleared his calendar, an unprecedented move that had his assistant calling repeatedly until he finally told her he was taking family leave. "Family leave?" Natalia heard him say into the phone, his voice firm. "Yes, I'm aware the company has never had a CEO take family leave before. We're setting a new precedent. Forward everything to Marcus. He's been handling things perfectly. He'd promoted someone, delegated, actually stepped away from the company that had consumed him for a decade." Natalia didn't know what to do with this information. On the 4th day, Damien asked if he could try changing Elena's diaper. Natalia watched him fumble with it, taking 3 times as long as necessary, Elena squirming and protesting, Damien muttering apologies and encouragement in equal measure. When he finally succeeded diaper on crooked but functional, he looked up at Natalia with such pride she almost laughed. "I did it," he said, like he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. "You did it," she confirmed. That night, Elena woke crying at 2 in the morning. Natalia started to get up, but through the baby monitor, she heard movement. Damien's voice, soft and uncertain, filtered through. "Hey, little one. It's okay. I'm here. I know. You don't know me yet. But I'm your dad, and I'm gonna figure this out, I promise." She heard him pick Elena up, heard the shuffle of his footsteps as he paced, and then, hesitantly, he started to sing. Off-key, barely more than a whisper, but a lullaby nonetheless. Natalia didn't recognize the melody. It was something made up, improvised, genuine. Elena's crying gradually subsided. Natalia lay in the darkness, listening to Damien walk their daughter back to sleep, and felt something inside her begin to thaw. Not trust, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, the willingness to consider it. The lie was getting heavier. By the end of the first week, Natalia felt it pressing against her chest every time Damien looked at her with hope in his eyes, every time he fumbled through a diaper change with endearing determination, every time he asked her questions about their past, and she had to pretend not to know the answers. She watched him change. Not in grand gestures, those were easy, those were temporary, but in the accumulation of small, consistent choices. He woke before Elena every morning, preparing coffee the way Natalia liked it, even though she'd never told him her preference. He'd somehow remembered. Or maybe he'd always known and just never prioritized showing it. The second week brought unexpected challenges. Elena developed a fever, nothing serious, just teething. but it sent both parents into controlled panic. Damien wanted to call specialists, rush her to the emergency room. Natalia, drawing on 6 months of solo parenting, knew it was normal. They compromised. A regular pediatrician appointment, not an emergency response team. In the doctor's waiting room, Damien filled out forms with Natalia's help. When he got to the section about family medical history, he looked at her helplessly. "I don't know your family's medical background. I never asked." "Why would you need to?" Natalia said, playing her role. "You said we lived together for 4 years." Damien's expression crumbled. "Because I was so focused on myself that I never learned the basics about the person I claimed to love." He set down the pen. "Your mother's name is Carmen. She lives in New Mexico. She raised you alone after your father left when you were 6. You have her eyes and her stubbornness. You're allergic to shellfish, you get migraines when it's about to rain, and you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on something." He met her gaze. "I noticed everything about you, Natalia. I just failed at showing you it mattered more than my next acquisition." The doctor called them back before Natalia could respond. She was grateful. The mask was slipping. That evening, after Elena was asleep and they'd fallen into their routine of cleaning up the dinner disaster together, Damien's cooking was improving, but remained enthusiastically chaotic. He asked her about her art. "The doctors said familiar activities might help," he explained, drying a plate with more care than necessary. "You used to paint. You were brilliant at it. You had a small studio downtown before we met, sold pieces to a gallery in Pioneer Square." "I painted?" Natalia kept her voice curious, but her heart ached. She'd given it up when Elena was born, when survival became more important than self-expression. "You did. You were working on a series about urban isolation, people in crowds, but utterly alone. It was." He trailed off, searching for words. "It was devastating and beautiful. The gallery wanted to do a show, but you turned it down because you were pregnant and I was working insane hours and you didn't think you could manage it all." "Did you encourage me to do it anyway?" Natalia asked, already knowing the answer. Damien's silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, "I told you the show could wait, that we'd have time after the baby came." He set down the plate. "I stole your time, Natalia. I stole your dreams because I was too selfish to make space for them alongside mine." The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too intimate. Natalia needed air, needed distance from his honesty. "I'm tired. I should check on Elena." But Damien caught her hand gently. "Wait, there's something else." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. "I tracked down the pieces from your abandoned show. The gallery still had some in storage. I bought them back. They're in a storage unit downtown. I thought when you're ready, maybe you'd want to see them." Natalia stared at the phone screen. There, captured in digital pixels, were paintings she'd created years ago. Pieces of her soul she thought were lost. Her throat tightened dangerously. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're not just Elena's mother. You're not just the woman I failed. You're an artist. You're a person with dreams that matter." His voice was rough. "And I want to support those dreams this time, if you'll let me." This was the moment. The weight of the deception became unbearable. Natalia looked at this man, this changed, genuine, present version of Damien, and realized she couldn't lie to him anymore. "Not about this." "I remember," she said quietly. Damien froze. "What?" "I remember everything." The words tumbled out. Liberation and terror combined. The wedding you missed planning. The promises you broke. The loneliness of loving someone who was never fully present. "I remember why I left Damien." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "And I remember that I don't know if I can do this again." The color drained from his face. "You've been faking?" "I've been protecting myself," she corrected, voice shaking. "Because the truth is, I still love you. I loved you when I left. I loved you every day I was gone. And I love you now standing in this kitchen that used to feel like a prison." She swiped at her tears. "And that terrifies me, because love wasn't enough before. My love didn't make you stay for Elena's first laugh, or her first smile, or any of her firsts. So, why would it be enough now?" Damien looked like she'd struck him. He gripped the counter, knuckles white. "Because I'm different now," he said hoarsely. "The 6 months you were gone destroyed me. I stepped back from the company. Marcus is handling day-to-day operations as CEO. I've been in therapy 3 times a week, learning how to be present instead of just physically existing in the same space. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, showing her his calendar. Look, no meetings before 9 in the morning or after 5 in the evening. Wednesdays are completely blocked off family days. Weekends are sacred. He met her eyes, desperate. I can't undo the past, but I've rebuilt my entire life around making sure I don't repeat those mistakes. Natalia wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly, it hurt. Words are easy, Damien. You've always been good with words. Promises, grand declarations. But it's the small moments where you disappear, the Tuesday dinners, the lazy Sunday mornings, the unglamorous, ordinary parts of life that aren't as exciting as closing deals. Then test me, Damien challenged, intensity blazing in his expression. Stay. Not in the penthouse if you don't want to. I'll get you an apartment nearby. Anything you need. Set whatever boundaries you want. I'll show up for every Tuesday dinner, every Sunday morning, every ordinary, unglamorous moment. His voice cracked. I'll prove that you and Elena are more important than any company, any deal, any amount of money. Elena chose that moment to whimper through the baby monitor. Both parents turned toward the sound instinctively, but Natalia was faster. I need to think, she said, moving toward the nursery. Damien didn't follow. When she returned, he was still in the kitchen, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. She'd broken him with the truth. But maybe that's what needed to happen for something real to be built. That night, neither of them slept. Natalia lay in the guest room, running through scenarios. She could leave again, take Elena, and disappear more carefully this time. But what kind of life was that, always running, always afraid? Elena deserved stability. She deserved to know her father, if he'd truly changed. And maybe, just maybe, Natalia deserved to find out if second chances were real or just something people talked about in stories. Morning came with Elena's usual demands. When Natalia carried her to the kitchen, she found Damien already there, looking like he hadn't slept either. He'd made breakfast, actual edible breakfast, nothing burning or destroyed. Scrambled eggs, toast, fruit. Simple, but successful. I have a proposal, Natalia said, settling Elena in her high chair. Not marriage, she clarified quickly at his expression. A test. You have 1 month to prove this is real. Not grand gestures. I don't care about jewelry or trips or expensive gifts. I want consistency. I want presence. I want to see that on the hard days, the boring days, the days when Elena is screaming and I'm exhausted and there's nothing glamorous about any of it, you still choose us. Hope blazed in Damien's eyes. 1 month, he agreed immediately. And when I prove it, we set another month. And another. However long it takes for you to trust me again. If you fail, Natalia continued, needing him to understand the stakes, I leave. And this time, you don't follow. You don't send investigators. You don't use your money to track us down. You let us go. The condition hung heavy between them. Damien swallowed hard, his throat working. Then he nodded. Deal. Not everyone can appreciate the complexity of what just happened. But you get it, don't you? That split second where someone has to decide between the safety of distance and the risk of hoping. That's the moment where everything changes. That's why you're still listening. The testing period began with Tuesday dinner. It was their first official test, though Damien didn't know she was mentally keeping score. He showed up ready to cook, ingredients in hand, determined to make something beyond breakfast food. He'd chosen lasagna, ambitious but manageable with Natalia's guidance. They worked side by side in the kitchen, Elena playing on a blanket nearby. Damien followed instructions carefully, asking questions, instead of assuming he knew better. When he made a mistake adding too much salt to the sauce, he didn't brush it off or order takeout as a backup. He problem-solved, adding tomatoes and a touch of sugar to balance it. It's not perfect, he said when they finally sat down to eat, but it's edible. It's good, Natalia said truthfully, and you didn't give up when it got difficult. Something passed between them at that simple observation. It wasn't about the lasagna. Wednesday was his block day completely devoted to them. Natalia had expected him to struggle with this, to check his phone constantly, to be physically present but mentally elsewhere. Instead, he asked what she wanted to do. There's a music class for babies at the community center, she said, testing him. It's in the morning, very suburban. Very not. Billionaire CEO. Sign us up, he said without hesitation. The community center was everything Damien's usual world wasn't: worn carpets, fluorescent lighting, mothers in yoga pants instead of designer clothes. Natalia watched for signs of discomfort, superiority, impatience. Instead, she saw him engaged completely. He sat cross-legged on the floor with Elena in his lap, clapping to the music, singing along with simple songs about wheels on buses and itsy-bitsy spiders. Other mothers noticed him. Of course they did. He was objectively attractive, attentive, and clearly smitten with his daughter. One woman asked Natalia, "How old is your baby?" 9 months, Natalia replied. "She's lucky to have such an involved father. My husband won't come to these classes, says they're mom stuff." Natalia glanced at Damien, who was helping Elena shake a maraca with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Yeah," she said softly. "She is." After class, they walked to a nearby park. It was autumn in Seattle. Crisp air, leaves turning gold and red. The kind of perfect fall day that made the city's reputation for rain seem like slander. They found a bench near the playground, Elena alternating between their laps, fascinated by everything. "This is nice," Damien said quietly, watching their daughter reach for a falling leaf. "This is ordinary," Natalia corrected. "This is the boring suburban life you used to think you were too important for." "I was an idiot," he said without defensiveness. "This," he gestured at the park, at Elena, at the two of them sitting together. "This is everything. The rest is just maintenance. Funding for this." Natalia looked at him, searching for cracks in the sincerity. She found none. "It's only been a week," she said quietly. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not promising," Damien said, meeting her eyes. "I'm doing, every day. That's all I can offer, to show up, every single day, and choose this." And the first month passed in a rhythm of small, consistent moments. Damien didn't miss a single Tuesday dinner. He didn't check his phone during meals. He showed up to every pediatrician appointment, every music class, every ordinary moment that made up the architecture of their days. But Natalia kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the emergency board meeting that couldn't be missed, for the deal too lucrative to turn down, for the old Damien to resurface. It happened on week 5. Damien's phone rang during breakfast. He glanced at the screen, and Natalia saw something flash across his face recognition, importance. Her stomach dropped. "It's my CFO," he said quietly. "There's a situation with the Tokyo expansion. A multi-billion-dollar partnership is on the line." He looked at Natalia, then at Elena, then back at his phone. The device kept ringing, insistent. This was it, the test. Natalia held her breath. Damien declined the call. "Whatever it is," he said, setting the phone face down on the counter, "Marcus can handle it. That's why I promoted him. I'm exactly where I need to be." The phone rang again immediately. Damien powered it off completely. Natalia felt something crack open in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. The willingness to believe. "That partnership could be worth billions," she said softly. And this Damien gestured at their breakfast, at Elena smearing eggs on her face, at the ordinary beautiful mess of their morning. This is worth more. It was the first test he'd passed that cost him something real. The months that followed brought more tests, some deliberate, most accidental. Elena's first steps happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Damien was there, arms outstretched, catching her when she stumbled. Elena's first word was data, and Natalia watched Damien's face transform with joy she'd never seen before. But it was the small moments that truly convinced her. The way Damien woke before dawn to prepare Elena's bottle. The way he researched teething remedies and baby-proofing techniques with the same intensity he'd once applied to market analysis. The way he looked at Natalia, really looked, with presence and attention when she spoke. 4 months after moving back into the penthouse, Natalia found herself in the guest room she still occupied, staring at the wall that separated her from Damien's bedroom. They'd maintained careful distance, respecting boundaries. But something had shifted. She wasn't ready to forgive. Completely forgiveness was a process, not a destination, but she was ready to try building something new on the foundation of who they'd both become. That night, after putting Elena to bed, She found Damien in the living room, reviewing architectural plans. He looked up when she entered, hope and caution mixed in his expression. "What are these?" she asked. "House plans," he said. "I've been looking at properties outside the city. Somewhere with a yard for Elena to play in. A garden, maybe. A studio space for you." He paused. "I wanted your input before making any decisions. This isn't my life anymore, it's ours." Natalia looked at the plans spread across the coffee table. A craftsman-style house with large windows. A backyard with mature trees. A converted garage space marked art studio in pencil. "You're serious about this," she said softly. "I've never been more serious about anything." Damien set down the plans. "I know you're still in the guest room. I know we're still figuring this out. But whether we're together, or co-parenting, or something in between, I want us to have space that feels like home. Not a penthouse that was designed to impress business partners." Natalia sat beside him, studying the plans. "What about your commute? This is 40 minutes outside the city. Marcus runs the company now. I consult when needed, but I'm not running the day-to-day anymore." He looked at her. "My career isn't my identity. Being Elena's father is. Being your He stopped, uncertain. "Being in your life, however you'll have me, is." That night marked a turning point. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but real. They started having dinner together every evening. Started sharing stories about their days. Started rebuilding the foundation that had crumbled under the weight of ambition and neglect. 6 months after the 1-month test began, Natalia finally moved out of the guest room. Not into Damien's room that felt like rushing, but into a space they created together. They bought the house with the art studio. They painted Elena's new room together, laughing when they got more paint on each other than the walls. But the real test came 8 months in. Damien's phone rang during Elena's first swimming lesson. They were at the community center pool. Elena in her tiny swimsuit, Damien in the water supporting her, while Natalia filmed from the edge. The phone rang from the bag on the bench. Once, twice, 3 times. Damien glanced at it, then back at Elena, who was kicking her little legs and squealing with delight. "You should check that," Natalia said, something tightening in her chest. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Damien said, helping Elena float on her back. The phone rang again. Natalia walked over and looked at the screen. It was Marcus. And beneath it, a text message preview. "Tokyo merger falling apart. Board demanding you take the call. $4.2 billion on the line." Her blood ran cold. This was it. The real test. Not a $1 million deal, billions. The kind of deal that could define a career, cement a legacy, make headlines. She walked back to the pool's edge. "Damien, it's Marcus. The Tokyo merger is falling apart. The board wants you." Damien looked at her. Really looked at her. She could see him processing, see the old instincts warring with the new commitments. This was the fork in the road. The moment where he'd choose who he'd become versus who he used to be. "Tell Marcus, I have complete faith in his judgment," Damien said, never taking his hands off Elena. "Whatever decision he makes, I'll support. My family needs me right now. Damien, it's $4 billion. And she's learning to swim." His voice was steady, certain. "There will always be another deal, Natalia. There will never be another first swimming lesson. I made my choice 6 months ago. I'm not going back." Natalia's eyes filled with tears. She called Marcus back herself. "He's unavailable. Make the decision you think is best. He trusts you." When she hung up, Damien was watching her from the pool, Elena giggling in his arms, completely oblivious to the billions of dollars her father had just walked away from to stay present for her. "Come here," Damien said softly. Natalia slipped into the pool, clothes and all. Elena laughed and splashed between them, and Natalia realized this was the moment. This was when she truly believed he'd changed. Not because he said it, but because when faced with his old life and his new one, he chose them without hesitation. I wonder if you'll remember this story tomorrow, or if it'll fade like so many others we consume and forget. Something tells me you'll remember because this isn't about dramatic gestures. It's about the quiet, unsexy choice to show up when it costs you something real. That night, after Elena was asleep, Natalia found Damien on the back porch of their new house, staring at the stars. Marcus texted. He said when she joined him, they lost the Tokyo deal. The board is furious. They want me to come back full time. Natalia's heart sank. What did you tell them? I told them no. He turned to her. I told them that 2 years ago, I had everything by their definition. Money, power, success, and I was more miserable than I'd ever been. I told them I'd rather have Tuesday dinners and swimming lessons than another billion in the bank. He took her hand. I told them I already have everything that matters. You gave up billions for us, Natalia whispered. I gave up billions for a life worth living, he corrected. For mornings with my daughter, for the chance to watch you paint again, for the possibility that maybe, someday, you'll forgive me enough to let me love you the way I should have from the beginning. Natalia looked at this man who'd lost everything to find what actually mattered. I forgive you, she said quietly, and I'm ready to stop living in the past. I'm ready to see who we can become together. Damien pulled her close, and for the first time in over a year, Natalia let herself believe in second chances. 3 months later, Damien proposed, not with a massive diamond or a grand gesture, but with a simple question asked while they were doing dishes after dinner, Elena playing at their feet. Will you marry me? He asked, hands covered in soap suds. Not because we're supposed to, not because of Elena, but because I want to spend every ordinary, beautiful day of my life choosing you? Natalia looked at him, really looked. She saw the man who'd woken up every day for almost a year and chosen presence over prestige. Who'd walked away from billions to teach his daughter to swim. Who'd supported her return to painting, even commissioning a showing at the gallery that had wanted her work years ago. Yes, she said. But on one condition. Anything. We write our vows on coffee shop napkins, she said, smiling through tears. And we actually keep them this time. They married 6 weeks later in their backyard, surrounded by close friends and family. Elena toddled down the aisle, dropping flower petals everywhere. Marcus stood as best man. Natalia's mother cried through the entire ceremony. When Damien read his vows, scrawled on a napkin from their first date coffee shop, his voice broke. I choose you. Every day. Forever. And this time, I know what that actually means. It means showing up. It means Tuesday dinners and midnight feedings and swimming lessons. It means putting you first, not because it's easy, but because you're worth it. You've always been worth it. Natalia read hers through tears. You broke my heart, and then you proved that broken things can be rebuilt stronger than before. You showed me that change is possible, that people can become who they were always meant to be. I choose you. I choose us. I choose this beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life we're building together. 2 years later, Natalia stood in the art gallery during the opening of her first solo exhibition. The series was called Finding Home, paintings that chronicled her journey from loneliness to running to rebuilding. The centerpiece was a massive canvas of their backyard. Damien and Elena playing in the grass, ordinary and perfect. Damien stood beside her, holding 2-year-old Elena, who was chattering about the pretty colors in Mommy's paintings. A reporter from the local arts magazine approached. Miss Reyes-Cross, your work explores themes of isolation and reconnection. What inspired this series? Natalia looked at her husband and daughter. I spent years loving someone who couldn't see me, she said. Then I spent 6 months running from that love. And then I spent a year learning that the most powerful thing you can do is give someone the chance to prove they've changed, not because they owe it to you, but because they owe it to themselves. The reporter turned to Damien. Mr. Cross, you famously stepped down as CEO of Cross Atlantic Industries. Do you regret that decision? Damien looked at Elena, who was reaching for one of Natalia's paintings. Every day, he said, and Natalia's heart skipped. Then he smiled. Every day, I wake up grateful I made that choice. I don't regret a single thing. That evening, after the gallery closed and they'd put Elena to bed, Natalia and Damien sat on their back porch under the stars, their Tuesday ritual, sacred and protected. Do you ever miss it? Natalia asked. The empire, the deals, the adrenaline? Damien was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. Not the deals themselves, but the simplicity of it. Building a company is straightforward. You identify problems, create solutions, measure success in numbers. Being a husband and father is infinitely more complex. There's no spreadsheet for connection. No quarterly report for love. But, Natalia prompted, hearing the unspoken word. But this is real, he said. The company was impressive. This is meaningful. And I'd choose meaningful over impressive every single time now. Elena called out from her room, half asleep, wanting water. Both parents stood automatically, but Damien waved Natalia back down. I've got it, he said. Finish your wine. Enjoy the stars. Natalia watched him go. This man who journeyed from broken to rebuilt, from absent to present, from impressive to meaningful. She thought about the woman she'd been running through the night with a baby, terrified and alone but free, and the woman she was now rooted, connected, building a life she didn't need to escape from. The fake amnesia seemed like a lifetime ago. The desperate flight through anonymous towns, the hospital room where everything had changed. She'd pretended not to know him to protect herself, and in doing so, had given them both the space to start over. To meet each other as different people, the people they'd become through loss and longing and the hard work of change. Through the baby monitor, she heard Damien singing Elena back to sleep. The same made-up lullaby from that first night in the penthouse, now polished through 2 years of repetition. Elena's giggle. Damien's laugh. The ordinary sounds of a life well lived. If someone had told her 2 years ago that she'd be sitting here married, happy, believing in second chances, she wouldn't have believed them. But that's the thing about transformation. It doesn't happen in grand moments. It happens in 1,000 small choices, accumulating like interest, building something sustainable. Damien returned to the porch, settling beside her with a satisfied sigh. She wanted you to come say goodnight, too. Did you tell her I would? I told her Mommy was celebrating her art show, and she'd get extra snuggles in the morning. She's good with delayed gratification now. Wonder where she learned that, Natalia said, smiling. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from truly knowing someone, from weathering storms together, from choosing each other repeatedly until the choice becomes as natural as breathing. Thank you, Damien said quietly. For what? For running, for coming back, for giving me the chance to prove I could change. He took her hand. For not giving up on us, even when giving up would have been easier. Thank you for becoming someone worth coming back to, Natalia replied. Maybe you started listening to this story looking for drama, for scandal, for the explosive confrontation or the grand romantic gesture. But maybe you stayed because you recognize something deeper, that the real love stories aren't about the fireworks, they're about the person who shows up, who changes, who proves through action, not words, that you matter more than anything else. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that Damien had sold a year ago, someone else was probably working late, missing their family, believing the myth that success meant sacrificing presence for prestige. Damien had believed that myth too, once. It had cost him everything. But myths can be broken. People can change. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to build something real. Inside, Elena called out one more time, not scared, just wanting reassurance that her parents were still there. Damien and Natalia went to her together, sitting on either side of her toddler bed, each holding one of her small hands. Mommy? Daddy? Elena's voice was sleepy, content. We're right here, sweetheart, they said in unison. Forever? Natalia and Damien looked at each other over their daughter's head, sharing a smile that held 2 years of hard-won peace. Forever, they promised. And this time, they meant it.